I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. But I don't know how much longer that'll be lasting. Before we get into this week's episode, I know I already posted this over on the community tab on the day, but I wanted to extend this to video. Last Wednesday marked the 1-year anniversary of the Blind Faith episode, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge that a decent chunk of you found me through that video. You, the viewers, move this channel. It's grown a lot since Blind Faith, as have my abilities as a writer. It's a good enough episode with a much better thumbnail. I could almost articulate my thoughts. Thank you all for coming along for the ride and giving me the grace to grow as a writer. I know for a fact, back in the Blind Faith days, I would not have been able to evaluate this week's album. This stuff would have been way out of my depth. It might still be, who knows? But I'm so excited to be facing the challenge today. A challenge posed by the man who gave us such sage advice as, don't you eat that yellow snow. I actually bumped the mid-season special ahead a week so we could make this possible. This week we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Frank Zappa Apostrophe. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you get to pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here. You can find all of that on my channel. I got this DM on Instagram ahead of this episode saying, yo, be careful with the Zappa community. Some of the older fellows are kind of worshipy assholes. You say that like I haven't been consistently stumbling into hornets' nests for the past month. What's another one? So, let's take the plastic off. Judging by the giant bright pink sticker glaring at us from the front cover, I happen to have a promo copy. These were handed out to record stores and radio stations to plug the album. Not all promo copies are made ahead of release. My copy of Unknown Pleasures plugged a reissue after the success of New Order drummed up interest in the Joy Division back catalog. But looking at the white labels with the not for sale text, it looks like my Apostrophe did promote the release. Neon pink sticker aside, let's talk about this cover art. Frank had an eye for striking album art, my personal favorite being Hot Rats. Apostrophe is just as commanding, but more naturalistic. The front cover was photographed by Cal Schenkel. With subsequent solo albums like Shake Your Booty and The Joe's Garages, Frank was all about using the art of the portrait to assume a character for the record. Here on Apostrophe, it's just him, and all the most iconic things about him. The eyebrows, the long hair, the nose, and the mustache. Not to out myself as a failed artist, but Frank is an artist's dream because his features are so distinct, and he had these wonderfully expressive eyes that photos really don't do justice. On the back cover, we have our track listing, all of our credits, our many, many credits, and this little photo of Frank on stage by Mark Allison. Apostrophe is an album of songs and stories set to music, performed for your dining and dancing pleasure by Frank Zappa. On lead vocals, all guitar except for the rhythm guitar on the title track, that was Tony Duran, bass, and a sort of mandolin-like folk instrument called a bouzouki. At various points on the disc, you will hear the performances of George Duke on keys, synths, and serving as co-writer of Uncle Remus, Tom Fowler and Erroneous on bass, Ralph Humphrey, Ainsley Dunbar, Johnny Guerin, and Jim Gordon on drums, Ruth Underwood on marimba, and I believe the timpani. Our brass section consists of Ian Underwood and Napoleon Murphy Brock, kick-ass name by the way, Sal Marquez on trumpet, and Bruce Fowler on trombone, many a backing vocalist including Ruben and Frog of Ruben and the Jets, and Tina Turner and the Ikettes, and Jack Bruce, formerly of Cream and supergroup West Bruce and Lang on bass. Question mark? The whole thing is quite odd. We'll get to it later. This takes the award for the biggest production team I have ever seen on a Vinyl Monday record, including such familiar faces as Bob Ludwig and Herbie Cohen, and such outrageous titles as Wholesale Retail Discount, Discretion, Tradition, and Silent Alarm. Apostrophe was produced, arranged, and, quote, struggled with by Frank Zappa. Roll transition.
Watch out where the huskies go, and don't you eat that yellow snow. Right about that time, people.
The structure of this chapter of the video is inspired by a relevant Frank quote. He said, "One thing that's been consistent about the albums I put out is that each one appears to go in a different direction, but if you look a little bit closer, then it's all part of one continuous whole." Since the man himself said it's all interconnected, let's speed run everything he's done since our last Zappa excursion. Freak out. What has he been up to? Turns out a man can get a lot done in 7 years. For one, he's earned the title of prolific. He's put out another 13 studio albums after this, both on his own and with the ever-evolving Mothers of Invention, now just the Mothers. This doesn't count live albums or the 200 Motels soundtrack. He also somehow found the time to do those. He's really honed his approach to and use of satire since Freak Out, due in part to how times have changed. Now that there's considerable distance from us here in our year of the Lord 2024, from the 60s and 70s, we've forgotten just how fast the world moved back then. Look, here's some home footage of San Francisco in 1966, right? Here's the same city in 1967. That's just 1 year. We've had 7 of those tiny supernovas, and Frank's been putting out an average of 2 records a year through all of it. And being an American composer the whole time, he has been exercising his good old-fashioned American right to make it weird. The surprise underground success of Freak Out earned Frank and the Mothers a devoted cult following early on. It made records, tours, groups, entire labels of fellow freaks possible, and Frank was able to own all his masters. That is a big deal even today. Forget about the 60s and 70s. There were surely some more, but the only group I can think of that owned their masters were fellow Laurel Canyoners Love. In the years since spoofing doo-wop and whatever the hell Monster Magnet was, this new thing called prog emerged. By 1973, prog was king. ELP, Genesis, Yes, Jethro Tull, King Crimson are all active at this time. Pink Floyd have just released the biggest record of the year, Dark Side of the Moon, and the Mothers put out Overnight Sensation. This record is significant to our journey for 3 reasons, 4 if you count the fact that I dig the song about being a dental floss tycoon. Number 1, Frank wanted a girl group on the record. They'd inject a sort of old school R&B feel into the proggier direction of this music. Known dirtbag Ike Turner insists the Ikeettes only be paid $25 per song, but since the arrangements were so difficult, Frank went ahead and paid them $25 an hour for their time. Ike took 1 listen to what they were doing, went, "What the fuck is this?" and demand their names be left off the record. Number 2, while Frank is working on this Mothers project, not these mothers is crazy. He's working on this. The overnight sessions are the Apostrophe sessions. We have a return appearance from the Ikeettes, and Cosmic Debris references Camarillo Brillo in that classic Zappa self-referential way. And number 3, Overnight was a moderate commercial success. It spoofed 70s guitar rock and being a rock and roll band on tour. It was also a little prog in the way it blended rock and jazz. I'm not surprised it cracked the top 40. The cult following expands. With prog comes the concept album. The music naturally lends itself to the format. It's almost as if it progresses. All the bands I mentioned earlier, except for, I think, King Crimson, have made at least one. How does one explain the plot of Apostrophe? What makes a concept album? It's sonically cohesive, thematically cohesive, and all of those themes revolve around a central character, story, or question. Therefore, we might call Apostrophe a concept album. Or half of one. How does one explain the plot of Apostrophe? It definitely starts with our narrator explaining his dream. He dreamed he was an Eskimo named Nanook whose favorite baby seal is bludgeoned by an evil fur trapper with a lead-filled snowshoe. Please forgive my Zoomer brain. I can't help but imagine Sam Puckett's Buttersock.
I'm gonna get swingy with this thing.
Nanook flies into a rage and rubs yellow snow and 2 dog shit-filled snow cones into the fur trapper's eyes, blinding him. Then we switch to the fur trapper's point of view. He remembers an ancient cure for this very specific situation and travels to the parish of St. Alfonso to find it. There he stumbles on a pancake breakfast of unlimited debauchery and steals the margarine that I think is the cure to his blindness. Correct me if I'm wrong. Then we meet Father Vivian Oblivion, who is making the pancakes. Apparently the pancakes are sleazy. I'm starting to think these aren't pancakes. We're doing a dance. It's called the Funky Alfonso, and we don't actually know what happens to Nanook, his seal, the trapper, or his blindness. Then we meet the mystery man, who offers the narrator, unclear who the narrator is at this point, a fast track to enlightenment. He shows off various snake oils, but the narrator is wary of anyone who puts a price on spirituality. So he steals Mystery Man's crystal ball and says a fake spell to take away his fake powers. Then we have a sci-fi excursion, a brief 2-song break from the narratives. And our story ends with a guy getting a trench foot-like affliction that upon further examination I'm pretty sure is an STD, and an anthropomorphic poodle who breaks the fourth wall, acknowledging the fact that he's a character in the Frank Zappa extended cinematic universe. Considering all of that, it's a good thing this group was so well rehearsed going into the studio. Drummer Ralph Humphrey recalls workshopping the Apostrophe material while on tour in early '73, rehearsing 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. In an interview that year, Frank stated that half the tour set was scored with room for improvisational breaks, not unlike jazz. The other half wasn't put to paper, and at least 1 song a night was completely improvised. Sessions for what we hear on Apostrophe mostly take place through '72 and '73. It can be tricky to pin down an exact timeline because Frank had a habit of shuffling material from project to project. Like Drown and Doo, written during this time but not released for another 23 years. Rollo was meant to be an additional chapter in the Yellow Snow suite. This would have made the Apostrophe plot even more insane. We hear the motif called Rollo Interior, but Rollo itself was a live set exclusive number, sometimes with lyrics, sometimes without. The bones of Stinkfoot came from the Chunga's Revenge era, and the drum track of Eccentrifical Fours is even older, coming from the Hot Rats sessions. Side A, that's a lot more straightforward, was recorded in the summer of '73 with the Overnight and Apostrophe band. A decent chunk of work was done at Ike Turner's studio, Bollock Sound, and it was just a trip. The guys and gals would record for hours on end while Frank used the studio as another instrument. As for the story of the title track, things get a little murky. A track with the working title Energy Frontier came from a jam session at Electric Lady Studios in November of '72. Jim Gordon definitely played the drums. He was buddies with Jack Bruce. Jack was fresh out of touring with his Wombo Combo Cream Mountain supergroup. This is what Frank had to say about recording with him. Quote, "He's too busy. He doesn't really want to play the bass in terms of root functions. I think he has other things on his mind." So basically, Frank got annoyed because Jack just wanted to solo all the time. Gee, Frankie, it's almost as if you're jamming with 1/3 of Cream, the band that was 3 soloists all soloing on top of each other at the same time. Things took a weird turn in later years when Jack insisted he wasn't on the recording. He said he was called into Electric Lady to play cello. The cello sounded like shit. He left. To me, it seems like he said this because he either wasn't happy with his playing or had some kind of beef with Frank. No pun intended, even though it's very funny. Anyway, Energy Frontier was retitled to Apostrophe, became the title track of Apostrophe. The track listing of Apostrophe goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Don't eat the yellow snow. Then Nanook Rubs It, next St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, and Father Oblivion, and rounding out side 1 we have Cosmic Debris. Opening up side 2 we have Eccentrical Force, which goes right into Apostrophe. Then Uncle Remus, and the album closes with Stinkfoot. Apostrophe was released March 22nd, 1974, 50 years ago this week. It was the first release on Discreet Records, Frank's new label with Herbie Cohen. Somehow, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow was the single, and somehow it charted. You know, in the age before TikTok, it was pretty hard to capitalize on a novelty song, but in 1974, I guess if you're dealing with the exceptional absurdity of a song about yellow snow, people weren't just talking, they were curious. Curious enough to go out and buy the record, which peaked at number 10 in the United States. Sometimes I Love America, what the fuck is a kilometer? Frank and his group toured to support Apostrophe, in which the songs continued to evolve. Pancake Breakfast in particular got more and more elaborate. Apostrophe's reception at the time can be summed up with the following: either you get it or you don't. Rolling Stone published a mini review in the June 6th issue praising Frank's chops as a composer, guitarist, and comedian. It also shouts out Jack Bruce and Jim Gordon on the title track. Again, why did Jack try to retcon this? Then you have one of my favorite people, Robert Christgau. Our philosophies on grading records are fundamentally different. I begrudgingly respect that much. But then you have something like, quote, given Frank's distaste for Cosmic Debris, you'd think maybe he's come up with something earthier than Mahavishnu. But given his distaste for sex, you can be sure it's more cerebral instead. Which just proves he's fundamentally misunderstood both Frank Zappa and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I don't always share modern reviews, but this is one of the funniest I have ever read of anything. This was posted to the Prague archives by user Greenback, and I just have to share this quote. The tracks are unequal. Some reach a real quintessence, like St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast and Father Oblivion, while all the others are just too slow, not elaborated enough, outrageously vocals-oriented and narrative. They sound like the ordinary George Duke's albums. Sadly, R&B at the limit. I swear to God, this guy shut his eyes, pointed at 2 random song titles, and decided those would be the ones he'd praise. And again, missed the point of Zappa to an impressive degree. Dweezil has toured Apostrophe in the past. He's about to tour it again. The announcement just went out a couple days before me filming this, and the best part of the Classic Albums episode on Apostrophe, aside from the random Billy Bob Thornton cameo that threw me off so hard, is Dweezil at the mixing board, isolating the tracks from these songs. 50 years on, this is the record that got entire generations of fans into the Zappa-verse. So, what do I think of Apostrophe? Going in, great googly moogly. I was scared. Normalize saying you're scared of music. I began my Zappa journey with Freak Out during our first double album December excursion. What a time that was. Going in, what the fuck? Though it might not have been the most accessible endpoint, I knew I had to start with Freak Out because it's a product of the times I talk about most on this channel. It's a parody of all the music that wrote popular music in the 60s and in turn authored a decent chunk of popular music in the 60s. See Sgt. Pepper's. Please indulge me in some art talk. It's really the only way I know how to talk about things. Think of a painting in the style of pointillism, like this one. As we see in one of teenage me's favorite films, if you get too close, all you see is the dots. You totally lose the bigger picture. Now think of a Mark Rothko. At a first glance, they look like these big swaths of paint that anyone could make. But if you spend some time with it in person, you see it's actually many thin layers of paint built up into these translucent ephemeral shapes. They suck you in. If you're at too far a distance, whether that barrier is standing far away or looking flicking through your screen, you won't experience its power. Both of these conundrums together are how I experience Frank Zappa's music. Freak Out was so hard for me because at first I stood way too close to it. All of the details just looked like dots, and when I stood too far away, I missed some layers of cartoony pastiche. What makes Apostrophe special? At its core, it's Zappa's genuine love of music of all kinds. I believe this was his superpower because it gave him an uncanny ability to spoof said music while working with a seemingly impossible blend of genres. This frames his utterly whack-ass sense of humor, which either softens or sharpens his technical chops depending on where in your musical journey you're coming from. All of this is recorded by a truly exceptional group of musicians and recorded very well. This is a wonderfully produced album. All of those attributes are why this thing has lasted 50 years and why it remains one of the most accessible Zappa projects. Cannot believe I am kicking off a track-by-track breakdown with something called the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow Suite. Frank wrote this to f with me specifically. To begin with, one of the things 60s psychedelia got really into was psychoanalysis. One of known crackhead Sigmund Freud's favorite techniques was dream analysis. This is side one, Frank taking the piss out of psychoanalysis. The narrator is our patient, and we, the listeners, are the shrink trying to make sense of a dream about dog piss. We drop the needle on a synth that sounds like a blustery wind. This is a very proggy thing to do. Floyd did this more than once. It's our first of many, many sound effects. Frank was very comfortable with using this device to deliver a punchline. It injects some flavor into his quite deadpan delivery. He uses motifs as in-jokes too. On the surface, the little keys spat after dreamed I was an Eskimo is just a silly interjection, but no, it's from the jazz standard Midnight Sun, a phenomena that happens in the Arctic Circle. Snow has a really cool rubber banding-like motion. What I mean by that is you have the bass doing this chug somewhere between surf and funk, pushing the song forward. Intermittent guitar chords that are very 70s in tone and structure, and the drums switching back and forth from a simple pattern, just snare and cymbal, then filling in that pattern and kicking up the time. Every time I listen to Apostrophe, I'm drawn to the drums. You can tell Frank was a percussionist before he switched to guitar. He wrote parts you want to listen to. The backing vocals are where Frank's continuing late 50s, early 60s R&B influence comes through. Think of groups like the Flamingos or the Five Satins with that super low bass voice, or those crooner records with the ladies' interjections. Nanook Rubs It is just hilarious. You can tell they had a ball recording this. You can hear Frank holding back laughter through "It was strictly from commercial." Listen, toilet humor gets old for me pretty fast, but I cannot stop laughing at this one. In case you couldn't tell, absurdist and hyperspecificity humor is my weak spot. So when I first heard, "with a vigorous circular motion hitherto unknown to people in this area," come on, that is my sense of humor. And then having the nerve to follow it up with, "but destined to take the place of the mud shark in your mythology." I refuse to believe lyrics were just an accessory to Frank's compositions. He had to have had as much fun writing them as we do hearing them. Once I finally got over all of that, I realized not only is this song hilarious, it fucking rips. I'm a sucker for the jazzy horns, the searing guitar solos are unreasonably good. His phrasing is used to tell the story, punctuating one-liners like "great googly moogly." Right about here, I had a revelation. I appreciate Freak Out, but I thoroughly enjoy Apostrophe. The proof is in the pudding. I have had the dumbest shit stuck in my head all week, like lead, field, snowshoe, peekaboo. And for the most part, I don't mind. For one of my listens through, I did nothing but count every time a sound effect was used. 27. 27 times on a 31-minute record. This campy, uber-specific narrative device might not work if Frank didn't have the best of the best playing this music. I think it was Billy Bob Thornton, of all people, in the aforementioned documentary on this record who said, quote, "People don't always concentrate on Frank's musicianship. There's a lot of talk about his bands over the years, what great musicians he had in his band, but a lot of times he's overlooked." This might have been true back in 2007 when this documentary was made, but it's the exact opposite of the reality of Zappa's legacy in 2024. All we talk about is Zappa the auteur. I'm astonished by Ruth Underwood on marimba, George Duke on synths, and Ralph Humphrey, who's drumming through the whole Yellow Snow Suite. They're the MVPs of the record for sure. Frank drew the lines, equal parts intricate and playful, and these three added so much color. Take Pancake Breakfast, for example. From all musicians' accounts I have heard or read, this song is hell to play. But it's fun! After my aha moment in Nanook, I was on board for the full tilt absurdity of this thing. There's a call and response between Frank and the instruments. He's the setup, they're the punchline. They layer in cool, unexpected ways. Consider the stark contrast between the gnarly Brain Police-esque bass and the dizzying marimba by Ruth. She shines on the Rolo excerpt. No breaks, no nook to settle into, no comfy sounding chords.
This is a triad. A three-part chord consisting of 1, 3, and 5, the first, third, and fifth degree of the scale. There's your tonic triad. He would lose the third and move it down to the second. Rollo does not have one triad in it. It's all two chords.
Is it weird that I dig Frank's appreciation of the marimba this much? It added such a distinct flavor to his music, as do the awkwardly triumphant brass fanfares. George is right along for the ride with Ruth, and there's no more articulate description I can use for what Ralph is doing other than he is going off. He propels us into a white-knuckle finale, Father Oblivion. How Frank could spit out so many words, I have no idea. This song brings to attention how conversational the instruments are. Moments where everything follows the same melody, even the drums somehow, are these jolts of energy. There's lots of doubling patterns. I noticed it in the guitars to create these geometric shapes. It makes the breakdown with its globules of synths stupidly satisfying. From musicianship to arrangement to creativity of a higher caliber, this suite is spot on in a way I did not think it would be. Frank's secret weapon was the element of surprise. Also, this just occurred to me yesterday. I knew Black MIDI is inspired by Zappa. I never know if I'm holding this thing right side up or not. But I didn't see how until the Yellow Snow Suite. Black MIDI would absolutely slaughter a cover of this. I realize that kind of absurdity is an acquired taste for sure. Cosmic Debris Onward is the more palatable half of Apostrophe. This was the first song I knew from this record, so I was excited to see how it'd fit into the bigger picture. For one, it is sound effect overload. Most of the 27 happen in these 4 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have marimba on a funk song. This shouldn't work, but it does. It's mischievous. Frank uses an exaggerated husky voice the whole way through, so for the longest time, I just thought that was how he always sang. But no, it's another character, this slimy spiritual salesman. Can't say I'm a staunch atheist like Frank was, but I do agree that $500 virtual Reiki healing sessions and churches with logos are sketchy as fuck. Speaking of voices, hearing Tina freaking Turner under these circumstances, equal parts baffling and thrilling. Hats off to her for committing to the bit. She rocks this song. This thing is grimy goodness. You know, of all the stuff happening on Apostrophe, I feel like a dummy for the 1.5-minute long synth exercise being the thing that stumped me. The words to describe eccentrifugal fours are just outside of my vocabulary's reach. What I can say about this. The swirling circular sequencer establishes a quiet tension, amping you up for what's to come. What's to come? My favorite thing on the record. My reaction to first hearing this whir, which careens us into this heavy, riffy goodness, was something along the lines of, "Ah!" Of course, I dig Apostrophe. It's crunchy, muddy, fuzzed out, and a crossover with the Eric Clapton Extended Cinematic Universe. These are sounds I dig with a groove that comes so naturally to me, played by musicians that show up over and over on my favorite records. That main riff's got a Blue Cheer feel. I will say the jam works itself into a rut pretty early on. Maybe Frank and Jack were a little incongruous. There's a pretty obvious cut to get to Frank's solo, but I don't mind something that meanders. I didn't want it to end. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing more of Energy Frontier on the Crux of the Biscuit compilation. It's kind of perfect that we've gone from Freak Out to Apostrophe because Uncle Remus is in a way a continuation of Frank's thoughts on Trouble Every Day. This song snaps us out of the silliness and the groovin' and into reality. I think it was very smart to have this song after the most palatable thing, makes sure everyone is in the frame of mind to listen. It's co-written with Keys player George Duke, hence two perspectives on racism in America making one voice. Using the name Uncle Remus in and of itself invokes a very specific image, the racial caricatures that for a long time were the only way Black people were portrayed in media, and the quote magical Negro trope that still pops up today, enough that there's a movie being made on it. The narrator of this song speaks to this Uncle Remus character, asking him for sage advice on civil rights concerns of the day. Are we moving too slow? The first verse has a lot to do with the civil rights movement in the 60s. You know, famous images of men in suits being hosed down come to mind. With mention of the afro, we transition into the 70s and beyond. The 70s were quite a disillusioned time in history. Keep your nose to the grindstone, they say. Will that redeem us? While there are a lot less lawn jockeys to vandalize these days, there's still a lot of work to be done. As for the music, the Ikettes perform fabulously on this track. Aside from a chuckle at the deadpan arf arf arf, I was underwhelmed by the closer. All I really latched onto was the thesis of the record. The crux of the biscuit is the apostrophe. I don't really know what it's supposed to mean. Does it mean anything at all? It doesn't, and you can't, I won't, and it don't, it hasn't, it isn't, it even ain't, and it shouldn't, it couldn't. All of these denying phrases got me thinking of what, well, isn't. It got me thinking of negative space. In visual art, negative space, what isn't occupying, can be just as powerful as what is occupying, if not more so. So I want to ask you if it's possible for the crux of what is to be what isn't. It's an ironic observation, seeing as Apostrophe has absolutely no negative space. There's a lot going on here. Overall, philosophical conundrums aside, I had a blast with Apostrophe. This is the most fun I've had listening to a record for this series in a minute. I see why this was the album that got so many people on board with Zappa. 50 years later, and this thing is still sucking people into this freaky, bizarro, one-of-a-kind universe. I don't just respect Frank from afar anymore. I was able to engage with this material in a way that surprised me. What did I learn from Apostrophe? I learned that no, I am not too dumb to get Frank Zappa. This material has sounds I enjoy, stuff I didn't know I enjoyed, and all the things I love most about being a freak. This might just work its way into my everyday listening rotation. Is it the most basic of his albums? Yeah, maybe, but I don't think it's a bad thing to adjust your work to appeal to the masses, especially if you started out spoofing pop culture. I think what I like the most about Zappa is how his work demands a different level of attention from me. It's a level I strive to apply to all of my work moving forward. As serious as I took this assignment, it was entirely unserious. Outrageous fun. The folly won't be for everyone, but hey, mark me down as utterly captivated. In short, Apostrophe showed me how to stop worrying and love Frank Zappa. My personal favorites off this one are the Yellow us know Sweet, Cosmic Debris, and the title track. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that is it! That is Apostrophe 50 years later. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Frank Zappa? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet might tell you, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!